Hi, everybody. So thanks a lot for joining us for this, our latest community session. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Richard Millington. Hi, Richard.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Bit of everything, I think. Thanks a lot for being with us. So today we'll be talking about super ambassadors and micro communities. We've got a lot of interesting things to cover, so I'll start right away. Start with a quick intro of myself. That way, while we wait for others to actually join the webinar, we can make sure that everyone's there when the star of the show of today can actually be introduced. Talking about you, Richard. So my name is Quentin. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of TokyWoky. For those of you who don't know, what we do at TokyWoky is we build what we call community platforms for brands and retailers. And so we basically work with brands like L'Oreal, H&M, Feel Unique on gathering their best customers, what we call their ambassadors, and leveraging them to create as much value, business value, as possible. And one of the things we like to do is share our experiences building these communities. And so we often do these live sessions. And the goal of today's live session is to actually focus on what we see as one of the key rules of community building, which we call the 1% rule. It's actually something we discovered very early on and that we kind of take as a fundamental truth that you can, well, Richard will go a lot more into details, but I think you can sum it up as this idea that the best communities aren't necessarily the ones that have the most members. They're actually the ones who are the best at leveraging what we call their 1%, their super engaged, active members to create value. Now, as the story goes, for the last 6 years, we always felt we were a bit alone in the community space to focus so relentlessly on that 1% rule. But then we met Richard, and we started talking a couple of months back. We discovered we had a lot to share on the topic, and Richard had lots of cool experiences that kind of completed what we'd seen. And so that's how we got the idea of actually creating this specific webinar. So now I get to the fun part where I get to introduce our guest. So Richard, basically, for those of you who don't know him, is actually the founder of one of the world-renowned community consultancy, which is called Feverbee. He's worked with the likes of Sephora, Apple, Google, Facebook, some of the biggest companies on their actual community strategy. He actually publishes daily insights on his blog on community and has actually authored several books on the topic, the latest of which actually just got published, which is called Build Your Community. And Richard, being generous like he is, we have the opportunity of giving away 5 books at the end of the sessions. So we'll choose people at random, but keep an eye on your email. So let's get into it. So in the next hour, what will happen is I'll basically spend my time asking questions to Richard, and the goal of these questions will be, in the end, to kind of go through the following agenda. So intros were done. What we'll now be looking at is how do micro communities work? So I guess micro communities is Richard's version of the 1% rule, which is something we'll look at into more details. We'll also look about identifying and recruiting key customers. We'll look at how to actually engage and reward these super ambassadors. And we'll also focus on measuring the ROI of these communities and what your micro communities can actually generate. Here, it actually says we'll finish with a Q&A session. But to be honest, as you'll probably see, you've got the chat system on the right of your screen. And the more interactive, the better. So if you have any kind of question while we're actually chatting, don't hesitate to ask it. We've got an eye on it, and we can basically stop to ask any questions you might have, answer any questions you might have. Cool. So I think the first key question I'd like to start with, and I guess the obvious question is, so in your book, Richard, you mentioned what you call micro communities, and why in the end it's normal for communities to often have less active members than you'd actually think. Could you actually detail this idea?
Sure. And thank you for having me on here, of course. Like, it's great to have this opportunity. And it's also fantastic to get a chance to speak more with you. Like, TokyWoky, like besides having one of the most amazing names of any companies I've ever seen, what you do is actually unique. A lot of enterprise vendors have a similar offering, and I like what they do, but what you do is genuinely unique within the space, and I really like that. So before I answer this question, let me talk about the myth of brand communities, because I think the term community comes loaded with so many connotations about what we want it to be. And often we focus on what we want it to be instead of what a community or brand community actually is. And I think a lot of this traces back to brands like Harley Davidson, who, as the myth would have it, they were struggling. They started creating these communities for their customers, and then they thrived. And that turns out not to be entirely true. It turns out they managed to persuade the government to hike massive taxes on their competitors. But fundamentally, we still hold this kind of myth where we create these communities, they increase loyalty and they share brand love, and people will help one another, and then they'll become more attached and more loyal to the brand. That's how I think a lot of us think this works. And the reality is, all the data I'm seeing, all of the experiences I've had, all of the research I've done in organizations suggests that this isn't happening. There are some exceptions. We can all think of some cult brands like Supreme or someone like that who has an amazing following, and they do almost nothing, and they have a community that builds up around them. Most of us don't work for Supreme. And so when we talk about brand communities, I think what's actually happening is people come to a community because there's something specific they want. And that specific thing is usually information. And that means for a community to work, you need people that are seeking information, and you need people that are providing that information. And that's really easy to say from this side, like that's really simple. But when you dig into the weeds of it, what it means that you need to persuade people that your community is the single best place for that kind of information that has indispensable value that members can't get from anywhere else. And then you also need to motivate these people some of these people to provide information. And this is where we get to that 1% rule, or these micro communities, or participation inequality, or any of the terms that we want to give it. And for a long time, a lot of people have been thinking about this and thinking, oh my God, only 1% of my audience is actively participating and sharing information. And if only I could turn that into 2% or to 3%, I would double or triple the level of participation. But that isn't working. Like, we've got a lot of data on this. I mean, I've spent a lot of time pulling a huge data sets together, analyzing how many people participate in communities. And the answer is most people aren't participating much at all. The median number of posts by most members in a community, according to the data set we've gathered so far, is 1. And this doesn't even include the people that join and don't participate at all. I think that number is incredibly high as well. So what we're seeing is only a fraction of the audience actually participating, and only a really tiny number are sticking around for the long term. And even when we think about how many people are participating in communities in general, if we pull a data set from all the different kinds of primarily forum-based platforms, look at how many people are on average participating each month, what we find is what we have here. The mean number hovers around between 2,000 to 3,000. The median, probably a better predictor, around 900 to say 1,500 a month, that kind of range. So this idea that all of your customers are going to be participating in your community isn't going to happen. And maybe you'll be the glaring exception that defy all these rules. But I think there's a reason why only a tiny number of people are actively participating in a community, or at least only a tiny number are participating the way that we want them to participate. Even if we look at the data, if we look at how many posts people are making in a community, again, the data set is fairly similar here as well. We scraped all this data from different kinds of brand communities that are out there today. We analyzed it to see how many posts people are making. And what we find is that in most communities, if you're getting more than, let's say, 5,000 posts a month, you are doing above average, or you're above the median. And so if we think about the psychology about why a small number of people are making most of the contributions, it actually does make sense. If you are answering a question, there are certain things you want if you're answering a question, or if you're sharing a blog post, or sharing a look, or sharing anything that might help the organization. And it might be that you want to help. And that is a very valid reason. That's a very terrific reason. And we love people that have those reasons. But a lot of the time, it's because you want to impress the people in that community. Maybe you want to obtain a certain level of status within that community. Maybe you want to feel like you are making a unique, useful contribution to that community. And when you think about it through that prism, if everyone was doing it, it'd be impossible for anyone to feel unique. And so the reason why we have these kinds of dynamics that play out in almost every kind of community And again, with this data here we look at how the top X% of people and what percentage of posts they're participating in, highs and lows. What I find again is that there's a tiny number of members that are making maybe not the majority, but definitely a massively outsized number of posts in that community. And it's because in any group, only a few of those groups can really shine. Only a few people can be the top members in any community. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And if no one feels like they are getting a certain level of status, if no one feels like they are rising above the average, if no one feels like that they can obtain that kind of prestige and esteem that they want, they're going to stop participating in that community. And so these dynamics are quite natural. So when we're developing communities, and we can argue about what the term community means, but what we have to recognize is that fundamentally, most people that are visiting your community, your customers, they might be very loyal to you already, but what they want is information. And that information might be, my product isn't working the way I thought, and I'm asking for help. That's a great reason to go to a community. It's a great reason to get help from someone else. It might be, I'm going to a community because I want to be inspired. I want to be inspired by the unique looks that are on there. I want to find the kind of products that are the right fit for me and my skin tone, or the person that I am, or the person I want to be. Or I might want to just get new ideas for how I can design my living room, or whatever that is. But fundamentally, it's about information. And so we need people that are willing to provide information, that want to rise above average. And these are the people that we target most of our efforts at. These are the people we need to nurture. These are the people we need to design these super user campaigns and activities for, these brand ambassador efforts for. And then we also have to figure out not only how do we get people to create this amazing information, but how do we get other people to read it? How do we place it within the flow of how members already go through the life cycle at the moment, the customer life cycle at the moment? How do we get it into the flow of what they're already doing? How do we make the community a unique place? How does the community right now compete against, say, Instagram or social media channels? What is the unique thing that only can happen in your community? And if we get the balance of those two things right, everything else slots into place. But we don't have a homogeneous mass of people all sharing their brand love with each other. What we have in almost every community we've ever looked at is a tiny number of people that are sharing a lot of great responses. And then we have a large number of people that are asking one or two questions, and that's all they need. And that, when we begin with that understanding, it's a lot easier to design the kind of efforts and community activities that we want.
So I guess to kind of complete or understand what you're saying, the point would be, or what you're saying is, in the end, it doesn't matter if you have like 10,000 users. The key thing is having the right users at the right 1% or the right micro community. I guess my question then would be, do you have any examples of what a structure would look like, or how a community with just 10 or 100 people can actually create value?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really obvious that we prepared the answers of these questions in advance. I think absolutely. If you look at most communities, it's ironic that the goal for most communities is to try and drive as much engagement as an activity as possible. I would guess around 80 or 90% of the clients I've worked with over the last 10 years, including some of the largest brands in the world, their goal is to drive as much engagement as possible. But you actually don't need that much engagement to have a community that is generating a huge level of value for its audience. And you don't actually need a huge number of members, especially in terms of that 1% that are generating huge value for the audience. Take support. Support is one of the most common reasons to build a brand community. It's amazing to have a small number of people answering most questions. It means your customer support team don't have to do it. It means there's a lot of call deflection that's going on here. And not only that, if you look at brands like giffgaff and other organizations like that, they are saving huge amounts of money by delivering better support, because community answers can provide better responses than what people can get elsewhere. We've been working with HP over the last year, last 6 months or so, figuring out like what is the unique value of support. And you find out that even some of the customer support reps there rely on some of the answers in the community, because these are people that are using the products every single day and can provide unique answers and better answers. But you only need a tiny number of super users answering hundreds of questions each month, which isn't unrealistic to have a community that is generating huge value. One great response in a community can be seen by 5,000 or 10,000 individuals. If you look at the Adobe online community, the most popular post in that online community ever is, how do I open a file in Adobe Photoshop? The most beginner level question that you can imagine. But clearly it's generating a huge amount of value for the organization. Now, if you get 50 of them, suddenly you have a tremendously valuable community. Second one is success. And by success, we talk about the communities where people come to be inspired, where they come to learn more about the topic. In say in the beauty space, that might be sharing your looks, your designs, your ideas. In the SaaS space or the technology space, it might be more about how to get the most out of the products and services that the brand offers. Here, you don't need everyone sharing their advice, because a lot of people don't have a lot to share, and most people just come to learn. What you do have typically is a small number of people that are sharing a huge amount of information. Again, you don't need a huge number of people sharing this information, and even a huge amount of information might be a downside as much of a good side. If you think about, if you come to a community and you're overwhelmed with all this information that's out there, that's going to make it more difficult to find the content that you actually want. What you do want instead is a small number of people providing really great articles, really great advice, and then making sure that naturally rises to the top. If it's for ideas, if you have a community to generate good ideas and feedback and help you develop better products and services and those kind of things, then you don't need a huge number of people doing it. I've been working with a client recently just on this, where not to focus on getting as many people participating as much as possible, but to try and source great ideas, to validate those ideas, get a small number of people working to develop those ideas. Again, tremendously valuable for an organization. Take advocacy, for example. If you want a community that provides reviews and testimonials and case studies and sharing content, you don't need more and more reviews. Like if you've got 20,000 reviews on your site, having 20,001 doesn't make a big impact. What you do want is a small number of high quality reviews. What you do want is a small number of people that can respond to negative reviews. What you do want is a small number of people that can provide you with testimonials that you can use in your sales material. What you do want is a small number of people that will share your content on Twitter and Facebook and those kind of channels. And nearly every single thing that you want requires a small number of people. And the impact can be absolutely huge. If we look at how many super users you actually need in a program, it varies, but what we typically find is that it depends very much based upon the number of participants or the number of questions you get each month. So if we know that if you have, say, monthly participants, say 100 or 500 or 1,000 to 5,000, you don't actually need that many. When we started studying this, we find that most super user programs have between 10 and 50 members, and that kind of balances out with the averages we were seeing before. Some people do it by the number of questions, and this kind of makes sense because then you can make it more of a mathematical sum. So if you know a super user can typically answer X number of questions and you have X number of questions each month, you can put those two and two together and come up with a valid answer here. But what you'll notice is that we're not talking about a huge number of super users answering a huge number of questions. We're talking about a small number of super users contributing a small number of answers each month, and that takes you to where you need to go. And even in so many different contexts, a small number of people can generate a tremendous ROI. Take QuickBase, for example. QuickBase were very much struggling to be highly rated in the comparison sites in the category that they were in. But what they did, they turned to their community. They provided them with the right information, all the access of knowledge they needed, and then the motivation to go to these comparison sites and leave reviews and testimonials on these kind of things. And now they are the top rated. They are the top rated in the low code category that they're in. And this doesn't require thousands of members. It requires a few dozen members to do it well. And this has probably generated millions of dollars for them. But again, it doesn't have a huge number of people that are doing it. So a small number of people, if properly motivated and nurtured and engaged with in the right way, have a tremendous level of impact and provide the majority of value that is gained through developing a brand community. And this, by the way, just to clarify, this is a relief. If you've been chasing engagement metrics all this year, that's not sustainable. At a certain level, the level of engagement is going to peak. And so you have to think about what comes next. All I'm recommending here is that you bring that discussion forward to today and then start thinking about what comes next. If you're not just going to be about engagement anymore, what comes next? And I think this is what comes next. And this is what a lot of my new book is about.
Yeah, I think to answer some of the questions we've had, I think the first question from Camilla is linked to how can you tell in advance if your community, if you have the 1%, and if your community will work. And I think the comment is interesting because Camilla, you add a lot of the examples we're seeing is like makeup or skincare brands. And actually, that was my next example. And that's true. And I think to answer your question, typically, we're working with Superdrug. On Superdrug, we're actually seeing, so we have a community chat. Community chat is basically shoppers ask questions, the community can answer these questions. We run a community chat on, I would say, we've got more than 100 websites. A big chunk of them are actually beauty websites. These are the websites that get the most interactions by far. That and high-tech, like very geeky high-tech websites, these would be like your top categories. But in the end, if you look at these websites, you've got, I think per month, we've got more than 500,000 questions on all of these websites. All of these questions are answered. The majority of these questions are answered by 3,000 people. So basically 3,000 people answering somewhere between 500 to 1 million question every month. And that pattern, we don't just see in Superdrug. We don't just see in beauty. Of course, you get more in beauty because it's a more engaging field. But the second you start thinking that in the end, if you've got 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, then you can find, or in our experience, you can find these 20, 30 people in kind of like any field. Richard, you talked about GIFGAF, which is like phones, if I remember correctly. The earlier example was like low tech, so it's a bit techy, so it is interesting. But in our experience, there is few fields in which you can't find any type of engagement. The key thing, I think, is going to be finding the right way to engage your community. Because chat, in our case, for instance, works very well on anything that's a bit technical. So beauty doesn't seem technical, but trust me, from a guy's point of view, and when you look at the questions, it's extremely technical. DIY and tech, I think, are good examples. But at the same time, we work on creating communities with, next one would be like a fashion. So it's not technical. So the chat won't be our focus. But at the same time, what we do here is we get the 1%. So case of Monkey, we get those like, top 1,000 users to create looks. And what they do is they play around with the product catalog, they create looks, and we push that on product pages. And in the end, that's enough. Another example on other kind of sectors, it's basically looking for your influencers. And I think that's what the example that you gave on Trust Radius earlier is, within your community, there has to be 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 people who actually have reach on Twitter. They have reach on Instagram. They have a certain number of followers. If you can spot these guys and get them to talk just a bit more about you, then you're already creating value. In our case, when we look at what we're creating with the brands, we find that in nearly all cases, the top 100 community member, when you combined their reach on Instagram or Twitter, they actually have more followers than the whole brand. And so in that case, you also find, well, if I get 20, 30 people, I'm already creating value.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, of course, okay? Please.
Because I think what's really interesting about the question is that a lot of people, I think, if you tell them that you do online community work, they'll think, oh, I can do that because it doesn't sound that difficult from the outside, right? You're just talking to people on the internet. How hard can that be? But there are genuine skills in this work. And I think one of those skills is identifying and spotting and nurturing people that can participate in a program like this. And what I mean by this is that I remember in the first gaming community I was ever responsible for, this was like 15 or so years ago. And we had been around for a while, like a few years. We already knew who some of the top members were, and we sometimes engaged them, but this was way back in the day. And we weren't always super strict, and there were no formal programs for it. And then there's this one guy that joined one day, Martin, his name was. And within a week, he had made far above the average number of posts of what most members make. He had been volunteering to be more involved in different parts of the community. And you can see very early on that this is someone that wants to be more engaged. It's someone that wants to be more involved. He's not participating in the same way that everyone else does. And one of the skills in this work, and I think one of the really important skills, is being able to recognize in the tone of voice that people use, the language that they use, how frequently they participate, that, hey, this might be someone that we can turn into a top member of that community. It doesn't just have to be someone that has contributed the most posts, overall over the last 10 years, but someone that joins and participates in a unique way, in a different way. They're often people that do want to be more a part of that community. They often want to reach out to you more. They often want more contact with you personally. These are the kinds of people that can be these top members of that community.
Makes sense. Before we move on, I think that the next part we wanted to touch on with Richard, with recruitment and how do you recruit these guys. I think that will also help you answer your question, Camila, about how do you know or kind of find whether or not you've got your 1%. In the meantime, we've got one question from Magda about conversations. And it's true what we've been presenting so far is people posting information and the rest of the majority of people receiving it. And the question, I guess, Magda, you have is, yeah, but what about direct interactions between members? I guess to give you a quick, in our experience, basically, what you're trying to do with your community is create value. And so you'll use your 1% to create content that is visible to everyone else. When it comes to conversations and people interacting with one another, except when people are actually asking questions through chat, what we find is the ones that interact with each other are also part of the 1%. So within your community, within our communities, we always have a messaging system, some kind of a discussion group so that these guys can talk with one another. But when you're within those 1%, that's where you're going to see most of the conversations, because your 99% will usually be more in a, they'll be actually reading the content, but they won't actually be publishing it. So they'll be happy with just going to the forum side or getting inspired by pictures, but not necessarily actually interacting. And I guess last question from Jenny is, if you're in a field where the customers are constantly revolving, like bridal, how do you continue to nurture the 1%? That's a very good question. I guess a quick answer to that one before we go to the rest is, in those fields, we end up creating rotating communities. So basically, you're going to update the community. The women or guys that are getting married will be at that moment super active, creating pictures, sharing content that you'll then be able to reuse on your website or your media as long as you want. But you'll be constantly kind of like updating the community, although you will find some like hardcore fans of what you're doing that will stay along. Usually you'll find that there's a natural churn and change with these guys.
I would jump in very quickly on that last one, because I think it's really interesting with rotating communities like bridal or pregnancy, and communities that are like that, where sure, people don't stick around as long, but you have to think about, if you're one of those people that gives advice, that becomes a top member of that community, when it works well, your identity becomes someone that likes helping people with these issues. You begin to feel like more of an expert, so you're less likely to churn. And so, yeah, there is a churn of like the regular people that might be coming. It's more temporal in that sense. But in terms of the top 1%, there's a lot of the same tactics in how we recruit people, how we nurture them, how we motivate them. They still apply. When you've gone through that process, we want to make you feel like the top expert possible. We want you to feel like a superstar. We want you to feel like you're continually rising up the levels. We want you to feel like you're helping more and more people and having more and more of an impact. And if you can make people feel like that, the topic doesn't matter so much. I mean, there are some exceptions to that, but it matters how you make them feel. And if you make superstars feel amazing for their contributions to their community, they want to keep feeling amazing, so they keep coming back and engaging with that community. So the topic does matter, but not as much as what you might think in many of these situations. Okay.
I think just for the sake of keeping moving, we'll now move to the idea of how do you recruit these guys. Mary, I've seen your question. Good question. Promise we'll answer it at the end. And Aisha, seen your question too. It's actually down in the Q&A, one of the next question, but I think the answer will make more sense if we start with recruitment first. So I guess, yeah, my question, Richard, is basically, you want to get those 1%. How do you go about finding these guys?
Yeah, and so there's a easy way of doing it, and there's a better way of doing it, but it takes a lot more effort. The easy way is doing it is you look at your community, you see who some of the most active members are, the people that are participating the right way, have a good interest and seem like a good fit, And then you reach out to them and say, hey, can you join this program? Will give you this access, this status. We'll come to that in a second. And either they say yes or they say no, and then they join, and everything is great. And this can work well, but it tends not to be recruiting people for specific skills or expertise. It tends to be just trying to recruit a group of people together to perform more of what they're already doing. And the danger of this approach is that you end up giving incentives and spending a lot of time working with members to do the things that they were doing before. And we're seeing situations in the past where you take a group of people that are highly engaged, you give them a lot of rewards and benefits for being part of a program, and then they're not more engaged as a result. It's like putting a fence around a bunch of grazing sheep and saying it's a fence that made them graze. They were already doing those activities beforehand. And so a better way of going about this is start thinking very specifically, what do you want? What are you looking for? I mean, some clients we've worked with in the past, I mean, we spend a lot of time thinking about what are the specific skills and activities that we need people in this super user program to be doing? If you want people to be creating unique looks, then you want someone that has a background and skill to be doing that as well. But you also want people that have scope to do it better. If someone is already maxed out on the level of activity they can spend doing that, then it's going to be difficult to really incentivize them to do it more because they're already at that peak level. And so you have to think very carefully about who are these people that you actually want. You don't want to just be selecting the most active members in a community, because very often these are people that aren't going to become more active. So really think about the kinds of unique skills and expertise that you want within that program, and then figure out how that's going to apply. And one of the best things you can do is get a whole data set like this and really start thinking about what kind of skills and abilities do we want. And then you can, when you have a data set like this, you can pull together all the different posts they've made, the uploads they've made, the approved reviews they've made, the registration dates, all these kind of things, and think, okay, we're going to have a combination of people here that are the top members of the community because we think we want these people engaged here. We're going to have people that are sharing certain looks on this platform because this is a key part of the program here that we want. We want people that are reviewing us as well because this is a key part of the program we want. And then you're recruiting for more specific skills. You're not just putting the top people in a community together and trying to get them to be more active. You're being very selective about the kinds of people you want, the kinds of people that you want engaged in that community, and then you're inviting them to join. So don't just recruit people just for the sake of having people in that program. Be really selective about the kind of activity you want. And another thing I'd say is that you want to just be recruiting people for a mixture of different reasons. Like the reason why Wildcard is in here is that we want these certain people to be joining because they're being certainly active doing a specific thing. But there's a social influence that tends to kick in after a while, where if you've got a group of people that are highly active doing X, they tend to influence everyone else in that group to do the same thing as well. So you can incentivize a lot of people that are being active doing one thing to do another thing just by combining them with that group of individuals and building a kind of micro online community around that. So don't just be recruiting people for the level of activity. Really think about what are the goals and what are the specific behaviors you want. So we might have goals like these, for example, that we want to resolve 25% of support questions in the community. And that might be answering the majority of questions which are created by the community within 24 hours. That's a very specific behavior. And now we can take people that are already highly active and think about specific incentives and rewards if they answer questions within a certain time frame. We know they'll have to visit the community more often. We know there's certain workflows we need to set up. We can design something very specific for them. It might be we want to increase the expertise and the abilities of members in that community. And now we might be thinking about, okay, how do we incentivize the super users in that program to create their best resources for other members? How do we get them to find the best resources on the web and share them within the community? Again, it's a completely different set of behaviors. If it's advocacy, for example, we might be, how do we get them to share certain content and material on their own social media channels? If it's increasing loyalty and retention rates, then we might start thinking about how we facilitate connections between members, how we get the top members welcoming the newcomers to that community. All these things were done in the past, but they require different skills that go beyond just trying to recruit people by the level of activity or as active as they've been. So really spend a lot of time thinking about what specific goals you have, and then what behaviors match those goals, and then recruit people that have or the ability to engage in those kind of behaviors, the skills, experience, and the motivation to do it. If you do that, the results are far better than just trying to recruit the most active members in that community.
Yeah, 100%. Agree with that one. Maybe one question we often get is, in what you've presented, Richard, there is this idea that you already have a community. And so to answer the question that we got earlier on, how do I know if I have those 1%? You might tell yourself, well, my question is, do I build a community? So if I have to build a community to know whether there are 1% of the communities, I might actually lose time. And one thing that at least works for us in retailers is you actually usually have clues on whether or not you have active users. And these clues are going to be, and I think we could see that in your previous chart, Richard, is for instance, if you look at your review system on your e-commerce website, you'll probably see that within your reviews, there are some people that are already posting a lot more reviews than other users. You might see that some of your social networks is great for that. You might see some of these guys that keep answering questions on your Facebook or keep tweeting about you or keep mentioning you on their Instagram. These guys should actually give you some form of idea of whether or not you've got that kind of like 1%. Another technique that doesn't cost a lot, but that makes you like kind of get a feel for your community potential is simply leverage your CRM. Ask some questions, create a quick survey on Google Forms or Typeform, and ask people if they'd like to participate, how they would like to participate, and see what kind of answers you get and who actually answers. These are like very easy first steps to take to make sure that you do have the 1%, and also to actually know if you do have the 1%, as Richard was saying, what they want to participate and how you should be leveraging them.
Yeah, I think the 1% term, maybe we're using it too often because it's a little bit misleading, because after all, someone has to be in the top 1%, right? Like that's how statistics works. There's going to be a top 1%. I think the better question is, how do I know I'll get people willing to answer a lot of questions? How do I know if I'll get people willing to invest their time and their energy to help other people without expectation of pay, reward, or those kind of things? And I think almost every community will wrestle with this to a certain degree. And I think it's going to be more challenging if you're a brand that people don't love or want a strong association with. Like a lot of the people on here I can see come from brands that are well known, and people want to feel they have access to that brand, that they are associated with that, they have some sort of identity with that brand, so it's a lot easier. I think a lot of it, if you don't work for a brand that is in a particular category like that, it's more difficult, and there's no way of knowing for sure, and there's always a certain risk inherent with every community activity. But what you can do here is really think about, do we have people that know and like us? Do we have connections with customers directly? Are there people that if we hosted an event or webinar would show up? Do we have people that would ask questions? I mean, you can test ideas really easily on social media with a hashtag. You can test ideas on by hosting an event or webinar or those kind of things. You can test ideas really easily to check that it works. Are there people that are stepping up to do things that other members don't? And then you get a sense of what's working and what's not working there.
Absolutely. Maybe also keep moving forward on the different topics. I'm already seeing a lot of questions that we're going to be answering in the meantime. Good questions. I guess one quick overview when we're talking about recruiting, Richard, in your experience, what are the best ways to recruit? Maybe covering that, I think also will answer a couple of questions.
Sure. There's generally three approaches that tend to be used. Direct outreach. This is where you draw up a criteria, like we've been talking about before. You reach out to people to join a program that you've put together, and then hopefully they join. You're just headhunting the people that you want by certain skills that they have. This is often used when you're just getting a community off the ground. When you're trying to get things going for the very first time, this is what is most commonly used. Typically, then a lot of programs advance to an application form where they have people that are part of this program for up to a year. And it's kind of important because you have to be careful about the legal ramifications of a super user program as well. But after a year, then you can invite people back, or you can let people apply to join. This is an application form where you know what skills you're looking for. You can put that in the kind of process, and then people can apply to join that program. The benefit of this is that then it's kind of less work for you. And also then it starts to feel like something that people get to do if they have achieved a certain status or benefit within that community. And finally, some of the very top programs that are out there today, we're talking like Microsoft, perhaps, Autodesk, and a few others. I think they have a nomination form instead, where you can't nominate yourself. Other members of the community have to nominate you. This is very difficult to pull off, but it works well. It's something that people campaign for, and they get to be a part of that program as well. So we don't have website yet, but yeah, there's 3 ways that tend to work well. And obviously there's different kinds of work with brand ambassadors. When you're incentivizing brand ambassadors on social media, that's more of a direct outreach process there. But it's really about, if you're just getting started, I think direct outreach is probably the best case, then shifting to an application form once a program is established.
Cool. Yeah, nothing to add here. It's just funny that you've been working on your side for all these years, and we've been working on our side, and that we get to the exact same conclusion. And I think
glad to hear it.
I think the last kind of key question that will answer some of the questions we've seen from Faith, from Rich, from Aisha earlier, is the question of how do you actually reward these users? Or I think using the word reward is already kind of like answering the question in one way and not the other. But how do you actually get these guys active? What's your strategy to get these guys to keep coming back and creating value and contributing in your communities?
Yeah, I think you're right with the term reward. I mean, I use it a lot. I've used it in like these slides as well. I think a better term than reward is persuade. How do we persuade people to perform the behaviors we want? Because you have to think about the idea that people engaging with one another in a community like this, answering questions, sharing content, it's a profoundly weird thing to do when you really think about it. No one goes to their local supermarket and offers to stack the shelves. It just doesn't happen. It's a profoundly weird thing that's taken place here. No one, will have a hard day at work and then try to plug themselves into like a typical customer support line. No one, a lot of people in this wouldn't volunteer to do like unpaid customer support, but yet they're doing it. And they're not doing it because they want to be paid, or at least not financially. I think what they're looking for is a feeling. A certain feeling is what they want. And the rewards have to be tied to that feeling you're trying to create. And so it's not about rewards so much. It's how do you give people a certain feeling, a feeling that makes them feel good? Because if you make them feel good, they'll keep doing it. And so that often is related to a sense of status. They are enabled to gain a level of prestige, and they want that feeling of prestige in their lives. And that's why they're willing to do it. Sometimes it's just feeling like they're helping other people in that community. They feel like they're useful, and that can be a very powerful reason to do it. Sometimes it's a sense of identity. They want to feel a sense of access to you. One of the most powerful rewards I've seen work in almost every kind of brand community here is access. They want to know some of the staff behind their brand. They want to feel a sense of connection with them. They want to be afforded with opportunities other people don't get. Sometimes it's influence or power. People want to have a certain level of power within that space. They want to feel like they're having a unique impact or a sense of control. Sometimes it's just a connection. They want to be part of a unique, special group. They want to feel like they have a close group of friends. I was working with one program 3 years ago here in the UK, and every morning someone would begin the day by posting in the private group of top members, good morning, and then someone would respond, and the whole day they'd just be checking in with each other. It was their friendship group. It was amazing. And a far rare one is challenges, where they get to participate in unique challenge. They feel like they're doing something that matters. And you'll notice that none of these really reference swag. I mean, swag, it can have a small impact if it's personalized, if it's unexpected, if it's kind of a thank you. But once it becomes expected or anticipated, it loses its power entirely. So when you're thinking about rewarding, we have to really move away from that mindset that people want to be paid in some way, or they want free stuff, because they don't. What they want is a feeling. And when you focus on the feeling, what you kind of realize is that the kind of things you offer can be very different from what you'd usually offer. A while back, I was working on a community where it's about where we wanted the top members of that community to share videos. It was related, I can't be too specific, but it's related to sharing videos with one another. And one of the rewards we offered, the most powerful reward that we ever offered, wasn't swag, it wasn't any of those kind of things. The most powerful reward we ever offered was training to make better videos. We paid for training, and the top members in the community were given tips and advice to create even better videos. And what we found is that they loved this. They loved being trained to do what they were already doing even better. It gave them this incredible sense of influence and connection and power. And not only that, not only did they create more videos afterwards, the quality of the videos got a lot better. So it's funny how like being told to learn something in some context can be such a disastrous thing. But when it creates that certain kind of feeling, it's really powerful. So things like VIP treatment at events, being mentioned and recognized can be useful. Badges depends, but they can be helpful as well. Things like exclusive news, sorry for the typo in there, but exclusive news information gives you a certain feeling. Direct access gives you a certain feeling. Giving feedback on the direction of the community or the brand gives you a certain feeling. So what we're looking when we talk about reward is how we persuade people by giving them a certain feeling that they associate with performing the behaviors that we want. Because if we can really create these feelings that people can't get from anywhere else, that's what is the most motivating and most persuasive and most powerful thing that we can offer. And that's what we need to think about. This is a skill in building a community today. It's not just replying to people on the internet or talking to people on the internet. It's about understanding these emotions and how to persuade people to do these things by creating that kind of feeling that motivates them. And this is like the secret. This is like the secret to building online communities on the web today. Is how do you find people that want these feelings and providing them that feeling? Because if you do that, everything else becomes a lot easier.
I think the experience we have on our side is so it goes, I think, in the same direction as you, Richard. But we also tend to open up a bit more to like transactional, to some extent, rewards. We find that, and that kind of answers the question we got from Aisha earlier about, where do you link community and affiliate programs? Because in the end, we find that I agree with Richard. What you need is to feel that you belong to a community, that you're special. But in the end, what we find is if you give the right rewards at the right moment, the right surprises, because sometimes surprises that you don't expect actually even more powerful, you're also building on that special relationship. And so I would say the relationship with affiliate programs is more and more we create community platforms where we actually integrate loyalty or we integrate the affiliate part. You can use both. If you do use both, and if you do rewards user for contributing, the great thing is that it helps scaling your community, because instead of going just for those 1% that are actually ready to do things without any kind of a reward, you can go up to those 5-10% who, once you give them the right incentive, they will start actually doing something and contributing. But the reason they will keep doing it is not that reward. They will keep doing it because you've created that feeling that Richard was talking about. So I think it's smart to actually find the good integrations. It's smart because it's also easier for you to manage once you have one tool, one front-facing tool for these guys. And I think that's important. And that kind of allows me to answer your question, Rich, also. You say you're basically working in automobile tires in an e-commerce retailer. Perfect example of something that does not sound like it's going to be crowds of people being passionate about the topic. What we find is, to me, that's a technical topic. That's a topic where if you create a community chat, if all goes well, you'll have 10, 20 people who will answer 99% of your question. The key is finding them. And in those kind of websites, we usually say, if you can attract them at the beginning with some contests, some challenges, some kind of rewards, it will go a lot faster to find these guys. But what you then work on is not creating a system where every time they answer 10 questions, they get X euro off or something like that. You create a system where then you put them into a place where they get that feeling that they're useful, that they're recognized, that they get to talk to you as a pair. And that's how you get these guys to stay. So to answer your question, if you've put the necessary effort and you've got the right strategy, yes, you can build a community chat when it comes to automobile tires. And that'll give me the opportunity to answer the question from Mary I promised I would answer earlier. As you see, whenever we're talking about a sector, we kind of have to shift our perception and think about how community applies to that sector. Our experience when it comes to art and museum, and it's potentially not going to be a surprise, is that the communities you'll build will potentially be centered on inspiration and how you get users to actually share what inspires them and actually learn from each other. So oftentimes, the communities we build that work with this are communities where, for instance, the main activity will be reviewing art and potentially creating lists. So saying, this is my top 10 French book from the 19th century literature. And then people will follow each other and get information from each other. So I would say on arts, your angle will be mainly, I would say, inspiration. And then I guess one last question, just to make sure we answer everyone. Faith, you had a question around the setting the expectations. The one thing we find is that if you want your community to thrive over time within your platform, one of your challenges is going to be proving ROI and making sure that your community is actually creating value. And I think that's where the 1% ties in beautifully, is that if your focus is to get the 1% to create content and to then leverage that content to impact the rest of your platform and the rest of your community, that's how you're going to create value. And so if I take the use case of the arts, for instance, if you got some art e-commerce website, if you manage to get your 1% to create the perfect list of these types of books or something, and you show these lists on product pages, then you get the 1% to inspire the 99%. And what you then track is, okay, what's the impact of that content on the 9% of visitors? And if you're able to track that, you're able to show ROI. So to answer your questions and I think it's a good summary, we're not going to look at how many people are in the community. We're going to look at the KPIs that show the impact of community content on sales, on retention, on acquisition for your community.
Let me quickly jump in there, because what I love about a discussion like this instead of a typical webinar is that, there's my experience, there's your experience, and sometimes it aligns and sometimes it doesn't. I think it's great to have that diversity. With KPIs and setting expectations, what I find is that I don't have an absolutist position on it. I think you always have to begin from where your management is today. What is their current understanding of community? What are their current expectations? Because otherwise you could just throwing numbers at them that might not mean anything to them at all. But never pluck numbers out of thin air. I think there's often a tendency at the moment where people will look at the number of posts or metrics in a community and then will say, okay, let's increase this by 20%. But that 20% is pulled out of thin air. It might be based upon something, it might be based upon nothing. And so it has to begin with an understanding of okay, this is what the top members are doing, this is what the next group is doing. We think if we incentivize them, we can move them up to this level. And it has to be based upon something. So I think KPIs has to be based upon what the trend lines are, how many posts are people making at the moment, what is the impact of those posts? So beginning with how where the management is at the moment. The other thing I would say, when it comes to KPIs, that metrics are great, but they have to support a broader story that you're telling. Because metrics, they need to support the story. They need to be one pillar in the story that you're creating, that narrative you're creating in that community. And that narrative might be, this is the future. We're going to have a lot of people, basically unpaid employees, given they're all supporting us. Or it might be, if we don't do this, our competitors are going to do it first. And you've got to find that emotional, persuasive argument as well. We know how persuasion works. You've got to be a credible source. You've got to have a logical argument. And then you've got to have the emotional argument as well. And I think being able to really think about what is the specific phrase, the imagery, the term you're going to use to really describe a community in the most digestible way, in the most powerful way. So that's something that you can spend a lot of time thinking about. So if you know how many posts that your members are making each month, or how many they are likely to make based upon the trend lines you're seeing, then you can compare that to something that they can understand. It'd be like having half a full-time employee or 5 full-time employees, or replacing the work of entire support department, or having an army of supporters, advocating on our behalf. Really try and put it into an emotional argument, and not just the metrics argument. So make sure your metrics are based upon something sound, something that you can point to and refer to, but then make sure there's an emotional component to that as well.
Yep. 100%. And I think one of the challenges on our side is when we arrive and we talk to brands and we see that they're not there yet, they don't have the maturity to see community as not just, the metrics, but really what's the vision and why it's basically essential to them in the next 5-10 years. It's really hard to actually convey that idea. And if you have that within your company and you can't convey it to management, then you have all my empathy, because I think it's actually incredibly hard to get people to see this. I actually think that one great way to get people to see this is to actually give them Richard's book, put that on their table, and get them to read the book. I think they will change their vision.
That is a smooth transition there. I love it.
See what I did there? But anyway, yeah. For the record, I think it's actually a great intro to the topic. It's super simple and it's easy to read there. We'll give you, after the session, you'll get the replay, but you also get 2 chapters from Richard's books, the ones that concern what we've been talking about today, so that you get a more, how can I say that, organized view into what we've been talking about than that kind of like interactive Q&A we've had so far.
Let me, if you don't mind me just jumping in, let me take like just 30 seconds to point out why I think this book is important, or why I think it's important now. Because I think there's some great books that are out there today that focus on, the big vision, big strategy of communities, what community could be in the future. This book is about the skills to develop a community. Because I believe every single community needs a highly trained community professional to thrive. Because you are like the pilot of your community. You can have all the best technology in the world. You can have a great support team around you. But if you can't ultimately fly that plane really well, you're not going to get to where you need to go. And what this book is about is a certain set of skills that we should all be having, that we should all possess when we are developing a community. Some of the skills we've talked about today, like how do you nurture the top members in the community? How do you keep people engaged in the community? A lot of communities have horrific retention rates. And we found we can go into almost any kind of organization and improve that just by embedding certain best practices in place, certain skills in place. And that's what I think this book is about. Not big theories, not any of those kind of things, but really about the body of skills that all of us should possess and understand, and that we can use to increase engagement, participation, and the results of any community that we have worked with. Anyway, that's my pitch. Feel free to go back to your thing.
Excellent pitch. Thanks a lot, Richard. Anyway, thanks a lot for taking the time to answer these questions. Thanks, everyone, for making it to this meeting. We'll send you the replay tomorrow at the latest. Well, for those of you who are, depending on where you are, have a great day or have a great evening, and talk to you soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks a lot, everyone.